Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for the meeting, a public informational meeting on the Eastern Connecticut Corridor Rail and Transit Feasibility Study. My name is Elise Greenberg, and I'm a transportation planner at the Connecticut DOT. I'm also the project manager from DOT on this study. And I'm joined today by Jill Cahoon, the project manager from AECOM, which is our consultant team on the study. I'm also joined by Lisa Rivers from the Connecticut DOT's Office of Transit and Ride Sharing. I'm joined by Angelo Luberis from DOT's Office of Rail, and Robert Bell from DOT's Office of Planning. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you for the Submarine Force Museum for letting us use their space for this meeting. I see that we are also joined by Representative Nolan, so thank you for joining us, and Mayor Hedrick from the town of Groton. Thank you for being here as well. Thank you for being here as well, Senator Summers. So we'll get started with a few housekeeping items first. This meeting is being recorded and is being live streamed on Connecticut DOT's YouTube channel. You can send any comments or questions to the project or study team at dotplanning@ct.gov or also by dialing 860-944-1111. And more information is also available on the study website, and the URL for that is available right now on this slide. The Connecticut Department of Transportation operates its programs and services without regard to race, color, and national origin in accordance with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. Any person who believes he or she has been aggrieved by unlawful discriminatory practice under Title VI may file a complaint with the Connecticut DOT. And there's information on this screen as to how you can file a complaint. And then the same information is available in Spanish. Just take a moment. So in compliance with the Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, no person shall, on the basis of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation or subject to discrimination in the development of this project. And more information on Title VI rights as well as how to file a complaint can be found at the URL on the slide shown currently. And we also have a voluntary post-meeting survey that is the URL for that is shown on the screen as well, so we can collect feedback on this meeting itself and better understand how we're doing with our public information meeting processes so that we can continue to improve upon that. A recording of the formal presentation will be posted to YouTube after the live event. Closed captioning, including non-English translation options, will be available at that time. So again, my name is Elise Greenberg, and we will be now starting the presentation, beginning with the study overview. We'll also go over the progress to date, and then we'll go into next steps for the study. This study was initiated by the DOT at the direction of the Connecticut State Legislature to investigate the feasibility and market for extending the Shoreline East rail service to the state of Rhode Island, establishing a new passenger rail service from the city of New London to the city of Norwich, establishing a new passenger train station in the town of Groton and Stonington Borough, extending other ground transportation systems in the eastern region of the state and providing interconnectivity between such systems and rail lines. Now let's first start off by defining what a feasibility study is. A feasibility study is the first step in evaluating the viability of service in corridors. Then, depending on the findings, further increasingly detailed studies and designs may follow. It's important to recognize that a feasibility study not only determines the feasibility from an infrastructure and operational standpoint of rail service, but also determining whether or not there's a market and demand for new service. In terms of the study's scope and the timeline, We've developed this study to be very comprehensive, considering a lot of different components. We'll be looking at documenting existing conditions, doing a feasibility analysis along the Norwich corridor, which will look at both sides of the Thames River, doing an analysis of the shoreline east extension, which is terminus will be Westerly, Rhode Island, which was determined in discussions with Rhode Island DOT. We'll also be looking at station siting for potential new stations and doing a transit-oriented development, or TOD, assessment at both the corridor level as well as the station area level. We're going to take a look at system equipment needs and doing a service review for operations. We'll look at transit connections around what would be the potential new station areas. We're going to look at doing ridership forecasts to account for projected future growth in the region. And we're going to be doing cost projections both on the capital improvement side and operations side. All of that will be rolled up into a final report, which we anticipate being complete, and the study entirely being complete in fall of 2023. And along the way, we've developed a lot of different engagement activities with various stakeholder groups. We have a study steering committee to help guide the study. We have multiple working groups, which I'll get into in the next slide. We are doing 2 different rounds of public outreach, and we also currently have a public survey that is available online throughout the month of December, and hopefully you saw information about that already outside this room, but we will show how to access that survey at the end of the presentation. And we're also doing targeted interviews with major employers and anchor institutions in the region. So we've developed 5 different working groups to help inform this study. We have a municipal working group, which consists of municipal staff, including town planners, economic development directors, town engineers, and also staff from the Southeastern Council of Governments. And we had our first meeting in June 2022, which we then followed up individually with municipalities to gather additional information through a survey of their respective development plans. We also met with the chief elected officials in the study area earlier this month. Another working group we have is the Transit, Micro Transit, and Bike Ped working group, which we had our first meeting in June of 2022, and we followed up with them for additional information which we received and is helping the preliminary phases of the study. As I mentioned, we're also holding one-on-one interviews with major employers and anchor institutions to understand what the transportation needs may be of their employees, students, visitors to their destination, and understand how new transit service may benefit their operations. We also have a rail working group with the different operators in the study area, which includes the freight operators and Amtrak, as well as Rhode Island DOT, and we met with them in October of 2022. And we have a customer focus working group, which we plan to meet with in early 2023 following this round of public engagement. So where are we now with the study? We've taken a look at study area demographics and travel patterns. We've also started a corridor assessment along the Thames River, again considering both the east and west side of the river. We've taken a look at conceptual potential station sites for future stations. We've also done the transit-oriented development corridor scan, and again, that's at the corridor level. And we've done a corridor capacity analysis. And all of that feeds into the preliminary feasibility assessment, which we are currently wrapping up and is the first phase of this study. I'll now hand it off to Jill, who will review the progress to date on the study.
Thanks, Elise, and welcome again to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to walk through where we are to date in the various elements of the preliminary feasibility assessment that Elise just outlined, starting with study area demographics and travel patterns. So our study area is shown on the map on this screen, and you can see that it is comprised of the communities along each of the corridors. The Thames River corridor, again east and west side of the river, as there are tracks on both sides, as well as along the northeast corridor between New London and Westerly. And we're also looking at the Groton secondary as well. So you can see here the population density is shown on this map, which, as you can see, follows along well with the locations of the two different types of corridors that we're looking at. We're also looking at other demographic and socioeconomic information within the study area, including vulnerable populations, those that we're calling those that are referred to as environmental justice communities. Those are areas of higher minority and low income, as well as limited English proficiency. So you can see that there are environmental justice communities in New London and Norwich, with some pockets in Groton as well. We're also looking at travel patterns. This in particular is showing how people commute to work and in the study area, and for those people who live in this study area, where they go to work. So in this case, we are specifically talking about commuting, and we'll talk about other trip purposes in the next couple of slides. So the map on the top shows where people work who live in the study area. So you can see that a lot of the people who live in the study area also work in the study area, as well as in adjacent communities and as far as Hartford and Providence along the lines. On the bottom, for the folks who work in the study area, this is showing where they're coming from, where they live. So you can see, again, a lot of folks who work in the study area also live in the study area, and then come from a larger region, and then again as far away as Hartford and Providence in bulk. As far as other types of trips go beyond commute trips, and including commute trips, we also used a data source called Streetlight Data. That's a third-party data source that uses cell phone data to understand travel patterns. So what we did was look at the major activity centers in the study area, and you can see those are listed across the bottom of the screen. Foxwoods, the sub-base, Mohegan Sun, Mystic, New London, Norwich, Pfizer and Electric Boat, Stonington, and Westerly. So what we were looking at trying to understand, using much more recent data than what's available from the Census Bureau, for example, is where people are coming from to go to those locations that are major destinations and anchor institutions in this study area. So what is shown here is the daily volume of people who are coming to each of those activity centers. And so the blue bar shows the average daily volume of people coming into those activity centers for all day types. The red bar shows weekday trips, average daily trips, and the green bars show average weekend trips per day. So you can see that some of the activity centers, like Foxwoods and Mohegan Sun, have more weekend activity, and then other of those activity centers like Pfizer and Electric Boat and Norwich have more weekday trips associated with them, which I think makes sense. Jumping into the existing transportation network within the study area, we are looking at existing transit services, bus and rail, as well as active transportation options that are available in the area, both in terms of how they may connect to station areas, as well as solutions in their own right. So there are 9 transit and rail providers that operate in the area. That includes passenger rail, fixed route public transit, on-demand public transit, commuter rail, ferry service, and active transportation options. So there are 16 regional Amtrak trains daily at New London and 8 in Mystic. There are 23 Shoreline East commuter rail trains every day at New London. There are 21 bus routes, fixed routes, that operate in the study area primarily by Southeast Area Transit District, SEAT, But there are also other routes, one from RIPTA, the Rhode Island Public Transit Authority in Westerly. There's also Wyndham Regional Transit, a route that comes down from the north, and one from Ninetown Transit coming in from the west. And there are also on-demand services, ferry services making connections, and intercity buses as well. Now, jumping into some of the assessment associated with the possible extension of passenger rail service. Looking at the Thames River corridor, again, the east and the west side of the corridor, we looked at all different types of physical infrastructure along each of the corridors. And so right now, both rail corridors have about 1 to 2 freight trains per day. The tracks are owned and operated by Genesee and Wyoming, and they are operating again at a freight speed, which is pretty slow. In order for the tracks to be upgraded to allow for passenger service, there would need to be substantial infrastructure improvements and technology improvements in order to be able to operate passenger rail service along this corridor. And as part of this study, we are estimating preliminary capital cost that would be associated with upgrading those tracks for passenger rail service. Additionally, because the tracks are operated at pretty slow speeds right now and would need a lot of technology upgrades to be able to operate passenger service and interconnect with the other services that are coming into this area, there are other studies that would also need to go into looking at those tracks on each side of the corridor, including bridge inspection and load rating, as well as grade crossing. I know that that's a big deal. Utility coordination, positive train control, and other technology solutions. Now, thinking about how folks would access passenger rail service, we are looking at different conceptual site for stations. For the conceptual station site review, we looked at 7 different zones of where train stations could possibly be located. We looked on either side of the Thames River. We looked in Groton along the main line, in Groton along the secondary, in Mystic, as well as in Stonington. So for each of these zones, we're looking at 3 or 4 different possible station sites, and we're doing an analysis to understand which would be a better choice based on a variety of characteristics to operate passenger service. We are also, both in both corridors, conducting a transit-oriented development corridor level scan. As Elise mentioned, this is a corridor level scan at this point in time. As we move forward in the study, we'll actually look at specific station sites as they are screened down to a more reasonable number. As I mentioned, we're right now looking at 7 zones and 18 or 19 station locations, so we need to reduce that number so that we can do the corridor, the more specific transit-oriented development at station sites. So looking at the corridor level scan for transit-oriented development, we looked at an area that we called the Transit-Oriented Development, or TOD, focus area. And that's a 2-mile buffer along each of the corridors, the Thames River corridor, as well as the Northeast corridor between New London and Westerly. And within this focus area, again, this 2-mile buffer, are located 6 of the region's 8 largest employers, as well as concentrations of office buildings and housing in New London and Norwich, office concentration in Mystic, as well as housing concentration in Groton. And again, this is existing. We're looking at existing at this point in time in this case. And we will be looking further out at projections moving forward, as Elise mentioned, and we've been looking for additional information on developments in each of the communities. Historically, this region has had an aging and shrinking population, and also has a lack of the modern housing and mobility options. And again, that's looking backwards. But looking forward, the projections are for growth in both population and employment. So with that projected growth come new opportunities. And so we're looking forward to with that growth and what those new opportunities could bring with regard to new transit investment, improved travel times, and direct connections for local employers. And I believe finally, the last element that we'll talk about before we open up to next steps and move on to questions is a corridor capacity analysis. So corridor capacity means in the corridors that we're looking at, there are existing train services. We noted that there is freight service along the corridor on each side of the Thames River. There's Amtrak, Shoreline East service, and it's the Amtrak Regional and Acela service on the Northeast Corridor. So we did an analysis to understand where expanded commuter rail trains could slot into the existing schedules. There's also, along the Northeast Corridor, the Coast Guard movable bridge constraints that we also needed to look at to understand corridor capacity in each of these areas. So on the Thames River, as we talked about, there's 1 to 2 trains per day. There's not a lot of capacity constraints specifically on either of those corridors because there's not a lot of service. The challenge on that side would, of course, be all of the associated infrastructure improvements that would need to happen to get those tracks and that line up to the level that would be required to operate passenger rail service. On the Northeast Corridor, as I mentioned, there's Amtrak, Acela, and regional service, Shoreline East coming into New London, and the movable bridge that the Coast Guard has regulations and constraints on. And what we can see is that 1 train per hour, 1 commuter train per hour in each direction is possible, would fit from a capacity standpoint. A 2nd train per hour could also possibly work, but not without substantial change and coordination and change with the movable bridge constraints. That's really, 1 train an hour is really all that could be accomplished in each direction with the movable bridge constraints. So that's where we are in looking at the feasibility and showing those possible levels. Turn it back to Elise to talk about what's next.
Thank you, Joe. So in terms of what's next, as I mentioned previously, we're in the process of completing the preliminary feasibility assessment, which we anticipate will be completed in early 2023 and made available at that time. And that assessment will be used to define the path forward for the study. We anticipate that it will help us refine the corridors and also identify possible station locations. And as Jill said, we are looking to narrow those down from the current 18 potential station locations that we're looking at currently. We'll then conduct a more detailed market and transit-oriented development analysis based on the potential station area level. We're also going to be identifying rail and transit service options, and we're going to estimate ridership potential based on future projected growth, as well as we're going to be doing cost estimates, and that will consider both costs of capital improvements and operating a new service. And really, we're ultimately using the final results to inform decision-making around future further study in the study area, as well as potentially further designs. In terms of upcoming engagement, we are anticipating meeting again with the steering committee as well as the customer focus working group in early 2023. And we will also have upcoming activities and ways to stay involved, as well as draft reports available as they become available. They'll be posted to our study webpage. So we encourage you to check back there for more information as the coming year continues on. And we also anticipate having another round of public engagement in the summer of next year when we have final results to present. And for easy access right now, you can scan the QR code there and visit the study website. So at this time, again, we have the study website. The URL is posted there, and if you have any questions at any time or comments that you would like to submit, you can contact dotplanning@ct.gov. And we also have currently an online survey available through the month of December where we'd like to gather your additional feedback as to where you go, where you live, what types of transit service you'd like to see in the area. And you can access that survey either through the study website, or you can scan the QR codes on this screen, and it's available in multiple languages. So at this time, that concludes our presentation, and we will open it up to questions and answers. And I will invite the rest of the study team over here so that we can see you easier. And Greg Benoit is going to come around with the microphone, so if you'll raise your hand if you have a question, he'll bring that around.
I'm just curious about the pushback from different communities. Granted, the demographics are different in New York, Groton, on both sides than about 15 years ago when they tried to do the bypass. Had old line installed, and a lot of people were very against the rail improvements. So what kind of opposition do you anticipate from different groups that seem to oppose any kind of improvements? I guess that's my question. Kind of harkens back to the last time they tried to do the rail improvement here.
Thank you for asking that question. To date, for this study, we actually haven't encountered any opposition yet. So far, all of the feedback that we've gotten has been very much favorable for the service at our public meetings. That being said, there may be opposition out there, but so far none of it has been shared with the study team. So I don't know if anyone else has anything to add.
And I will also add and remind folks this is a feasibility study as well, so we're not talking about immediate changes, which may also impact the type of feedback that we're getting. So again, we do welcome feedback, so please do let us know.
And I'm State Senator Heather Summers. I want to thank them for all their work. I was one of the legislators that was in full support of this feasibility study. I believe it's more than feasible. I think it's doable, and I think it's well overdue. I am in full support. I have submitted a letter of support previously, but I'm asking you, if you have thoughts that you're going to need additional dollars to continue the work, please let us know, because we're already starting to establish the budget for the coming years, and that's really important. And I encourage everybody who's here to fill out the survey, and please submit written, I'll call it testimony, but a letter of support if you're in support of this, so that we can move it to the next stage. Thank you for this. It is available online, so if you're taking pictures, you can just download it and get the study online. And I apologize, but I do have to leave early.
And I think it's very, very important for our region. It's an economic driver between the tourism in Mystic, the work at Electric Boat and Pfizer that we have, and also I'm sure many of us want to see this continue to TF Green Airport. It also will help with our carbon emissions as we move forward. So I'm excited to see the next stage. So I just want to say that before I head out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Clayton Mansfield, and I would like to know if you're including a study of creating an express commuter bus from New London, Groton, or Norwich to Hartford in your study. Because the idea of extending shoreline east to westerly is a nice idea. It's of limited benefit to me. I'm going to downtown westerly maybe. I'm going to the beach, not so much. But I live in Mystic, but I work in Hartford, and there is no viable public transportation right now to Hartford from where I live. So having an express commuter bus to get me up to Hartford when I have to work up there is something I'm very interested in.
Hi, I'm Lisa Rivers, the acting transit administrator for the Office of Transit and Ride Sharing.
Can you stand up and talk so we can hear?
Sure, I can be louder. So I'm the acting transit administrator for the Office of Transit and Ride and Sharing. From Mystic, your best option right now would be to get to Old Saybrook, where we have an express bus with service to Hartford 5 days a week. And as for future plans, we have been meeting with the city of Groton and Electric Boat and others to look at our park and ride lot system in eastern Connecticut, identifying lots up in Colchester where we have capacity, and looking at the potential of having commuter bus shuttles type things coming down to this area to feed the employment center. So you don't have to find more parking down here, we'll have them parked up there. Anything else you want to add?
I'll just add to what Lisa said. We're not looking specifically at connections to the Hartford region, but we are looking throughout the study area at interconnectivity between current transit service and where the potential new rail service would go. And we're trying to then use that to identify what gaps there may be in allowing there to be that better connectivity. I will kind of put a plug in for the survey. The survey will help us gather information on where you folks currently would like to see service, and that will also then be able to help inform, again, the direction of our study. It'll add to the desktop data that we've already collected and understanding where people are coming and going from and where they need to go in the region.
Good afternoon, everyone. State Rep Nolan, out of New London, the 39th District. One, I want to just thank you for the hard work that you're putting in regards to this. I was a staunch supporter of it also, along with many of the other southeastern Connecticut legislators and a lot of legislators throughout Connecticut. One question I had was about, you had the slide with the graph in regards to the scales, the blue, the red, and the green. Does that specifically give you the numbers in regards to people in our area? And if it does, could you just talk briefly on that so people can understand how many, the numbers of the people that are involved in taking the transportation or trying to get to the locations in our area? I think that's important for us to really focus on, because that is like a no-brainer to say that this project needs to happen because of this. I mean, it's incredible, the amount of people that travel through this area. And then if you just look at the people that travel right now, and just imagine how many more people would travel if we could give them the opportunity. A lot of people don't have cars, and that will close that gap for us. So I think that it's really important. And as was spoken earlier, please share the study with people. Everybody's got Facebook almost. Everybody's got LinkedIn and Instagram. Please put a link up on your pages so that we can get this out there, so that we can make sure that people understand how important this is for southeastern Connecticut, and also for people to take have any input as possible. You can reach us at the legislation through email. It's our first and last name. Please send us your request for support for this, because the more people that we have input on, the more people it helps us, and we want to attract other legislators from other areas. So please, please, please put it out there and tag us on it so that we know that it's out there so that we can share it. This is real important. Thank you very much.
But I'm wondering if you're looking at the aging population in this study area, because those of us who are getting older want to keep moving around. We want to go to the Guard. We want to go to the different places and participate in life, but we don't want to drive. And so this is, and we also have more money than a lot of other demographic groups. So, I mean, it's just something that I think you should consider as you work on this, that this is really the answer to keep people mobile and using the wonderful assets that the area has in terms of entertainment.
I just want to respond to that. That's an excellent point, and that is something that we're considering in the study. We're considering all demographics and how that may lead to new demand for new service, whether it be households that own cars, ages of the population, income level, all of those different factors that really feed into whether or not there's demand in terms of transit-dependent population and transit choice riders. So that is something that is being factored into this study.
Good morning. My name is Doug Brockway. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Economic Development Commission in Westerly. Observe a couple of things. When, on a preliminary basis, I guess Zell, I'm not sure how many of the study people visited with us in Westerly with Sean Lacey, the town manager, and the EDC and their town planner. One of the things that was immediately on their minds, and Sean spoke at this at moderate length, was the opportunity to tie the electric boat facilities in Quonset with the electric boat facilities in Connecticut. And there is rail that already goes up through South Kingston, through across from, I guess it's Kingston, but out to Quonset. And the ability to have that transit loop there, the ability to have people who want to work at Quonset but not drive all the way up there, who might live in this study area, is very important. It's already been mentioned in this room that it would be nice to extend the commuter rail up to the airport. That's good. We don't have any objection to that, but the Quonset link and the use of the rail for all that is very, very important. The other thing I'll observe for you is your photo of what's wonderful about downtown Westerly isn't. It's just what's across the street from the trail station. And if you want a good photo that shows what the investments have been made from the United Theater and all the new restaurants and the pending new hotels to show what's exciting about that as a destination, I can make that happen for you.
Matt Boudoin, I own a shop in downtown Mystic called Mystic Knotwork. I'm also on the board of the Mystic Chamber of Commerce. To echo the previous speaker, I live 100 feet from the Rhode Island border, and Westerly is an amazing link up to link it up with traffic through. And I also, my dad was a Navy contractor, and there's basically a train of cars that drive from Groton to Quonset daily. And also to TF Green to fly down to Norfolk and do service work down there for the Navy. So that's more, obviously the border, we're small states, so the link up on that would be on the Rhode Island side, not the Connecticut side, but to have that in mind, I think, is key. But what I stood up to speak about was, I'm looking at this feasibility study, and I'm seeing 3 projects. I'm seeing upgrade of freight rail to passenger safety and traffic load. I'm seeing building of a couple train stations, and I'm seeing increased utilization of previously existing properties. And it seems to me, if you look especially at Mystic, where that's a quarter mile from my shop, you're looking at 10,000 daily traffic that could potentially be taken off rail. To call out local celebrity, Mark Zinni and his husband actually take Amtrak from Old Saybrook to our shop about 3 times a year, because it's more convenient for him to walk to the Amtrak space, get off at the Mystic train station and walk downtown and enjoy his day, and not have to worry about parking, not have to worry about any of the concerns people have for tourism. So he's a one-man feasibility study on why people would want to have that service. And it seems to me that the use of the Mystic train station, even if as far as Westerly, is a really light lift, and maybe separate that out of the study so it doesn't have to wait for the freight and the rail and the slower, longer term projects with lower cost to them, and very quickly get some solutions in to drop some of the 95 traffic off. Congestion equals pollution, ecology and environmental systems. It seems like a very light lift. I'm thrilled with the project. I've seen it come up off and on over 10 years, and it feels like it's something that could be set to happen sooner than later, especially if we can divide out. And I agree with the Stonington Borough having its train stop. I agree with the Groton stop. I kind of have an idea where you have in mind. I think they're great. I think it's a second lift and a third lift being the rail improvements, which would cost obviously millions or billions to fix. So if we could coordinate out the later lifts first and then go to the heavier lifts afterwards, I'd appreciate it.
I'll respond to that. The feasibility study is taking into account phasing based on the recommendations that come out of this study, and depending on what those recommendations are, which again, we're not at that point yet. But when we get to that point, we will be looking at potential phasing of if there are implementable components that we see.
Okay.
So that's a very good point.
I'm just concerned the slowest thing would slow down everything, that's my concern.
My name is Victor Villagra. I live in Groton. I think, I get the sense that we all understand that the major large-scale behavior change in the public, be that among us, all of us who are getting older and would like to take the train as opposed to drive, but large-scale behavior change in the population requires that the infrastructure to motivate it and to incentivize it is there. That's why we're excited about this project. Given I'm a physician and I am keenly interested in the human health and safety factor considerations that, for example, may decrease the frequency of car accidents. Train ride is 17-fold safer than driving. I'm also concerned about the medium and short-term consequences to the public health of air pollution and contamination of the perimeter around congested highways like I-95. In order for us to take the train, it has to be convenient, it has to be high quality, it has to be reliable, and I would like to know what is the threshold of convenience, quality, cost that you're putting into your model to see if this is feasible. Because a project like this that does not meet the threshold of quality, convenience, cost, etc., for us to uptake this service would be a missed opportunity of major proportions. So can you comment on what are the inputs that you are putting into your model to convince us all that taking the train is safer, healthier, better for our environment, etc.?
Thank you. That's a great point and a great question. I think the answer is one that you'll appreciate, in that there's no one answer to that question. There are a lot of pieces, both qualitative and quantitative, that go into determining the feasibility of any type of new transit service. There are numbers associated with population and employment density, projections of development and things like that from a quantitative standpoint. But then the qualitative elements of customer and community support, as well as the amount and type of service that would be provided, and the number of trains and the amenities available at the station, the development that would be spurred because of this investment in transit, all of those things go into the determination of feasibility. So like when we're looking at a station site, for example, we're looking at transit access as it exists today or as it could exist in the future, bicycle and pedestrian access, safety, ADA accessibility to station sites, and the ADA accessibility of the service itself. So all of those components do go into our determination of feasibility, and it's not a one-size-fits-all, and it's not a one-number answer.
Hello, my name is Paige Gronk. I'm the Economic and Community Development Manager for the town of Groton. I've been advised by the town manager that the town is in full support of this feasibility study that includes the town council and also the town administration. Just moving a little deeper, more into economic development, there would be tremendous benefits to the town and the region itself. I'm admiring the sheet over there that talks about historic challenges: aging and shrinking populations, slow and negative employment growth, lack of modern housing, and limited mobility. We've recently done a housing study some people have heard about. There's a demand in our area alone for between 3,000 and 5,000 units over the next 5 to 10 years. So economic development to many people has translated to jobs. We're fortunate in having really a significant number of jobs. Economic development is more than that for us. Transportation, transit-oriented development, the housing, and the benefits that come from that are really critical. 82% of Groton's jobs are actually held by commuters. And I would think, although that's somewhat of a concern of ours, it's really a positive indicator for a study like this. We already have a demand for people to ride and get to Groton. The other point, I guess the last point I'd make is the connection between Connecticut and Rhode Island. This is really the last gap. We have a New York-Connecticut system that comes along the shoreline. In Massachusetts and Rhode Island, we have the MBTA. I drive to Groton every day. I'm actually a Rhode Island resident. And I did watch as the MBTA continued south. At this point, their southern terminus is Wickford Junction, which is right outside of Quonset. The state of Rhode Island has plans to extend down to Kingston, which is where URI is located. Next stop would be Westerly. So really, we're connecting two major metropolitan commuter rail lines. The connection between New York and Boston is really going to open up significant opportunities really beyond our area. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Susan Cullen. I'm with the town of Stonington. I'm the Director of Economic and Community Development there. Many of my comments actually would just repeat Mr. Bronx, so I won't go into my discussion about that gap and how important it would be for us to fill in that gap and the experiences that we've had in trying to get folks in between those pieces of that gap. And talking about the ADA compliance, that's a big part of what we're doing in our town as well in terms of pedestrian improvements, in terms of other improvements, and trying to make sure that that accessibility for everyone is there. There's also the lady who spoke about the fact that you wanted to live, you know, downtown in a modern building within walking distance of the train station. That will be a reality in downtown Pawcatuck. There's a fully permitted, it's now 82 units. It's about to become 70 in another week, and it'll be a restricted 55 and up. It's within walking distance of that Westerly train station. So if you want to know where that is, come back and ask me and I'll tell you, and you'll be able to walk. And that's a big part of, you know, we talk a lot about, you know, the cost of this. Well, the cost of this means that we're not spending money other places. We're not spending money adding, you know, lanes on I-95 that might not be able to exist because there are pinch points in areas where we don't own the right-of-way on both sides of the highway. And if you've ever looked at, you know, those feasibility studies in terms of our capacity analysis, there are areas that we don't have enough room to expand. And this is a great way to get people out of their cars, you know, out of other areas and fill in that gap. So just like Mr. Bronx said, the town of Stonington is in full support of this. Our administrators, you know, our town planning staff, and we are very much looking forward to seeing you bring this forward.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eugenia Villagra, and I live at 76 Riverview Avenue in Groton, Connecticut. And I am also co-chair of Groton Conservation Advocates, a 501c4 environmental advocacy organization founded in 2017. The biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, and therefore climate change, is transportation. Unfortunately, despite the increased adoption of green energy, over 90% of fuel used for transportation is still petroleum-based. This proposal to extend Shoreline East from New London to Westerly and Norwich will give us the option to travel in and out of Groton sustainably. Here's the difference we'll be making for the environment and climate. 1, less pollution and clearer skies. Every vehicle on the road, except electric vehicles, and of course there is a cost depending on how much green energy goes into our electric system, releases an average of 1 pound of CO2 per mile driven. Compared with driving alone, Taking public transportation reduces CO2 emissions by 45%, decreasing pollutants in the atmosphere and improving air quality. Expanded public transportation in Connecticut via rail and bus will save many metric tons of carbon dioxide annually. 2, healthier communities. Improved air quality in a community means not only clearer skies, but greater health benefits for the people who live there. That means fewer cases of respiratory ailments such as asthma and even cancer. People are also more prone to get out and exercise when air quality is better. 3, harmful chemicals are reduced. We usually think of gas as the only pollutant when it comes to cars, but cars also use antifreeze and other fluids that are bad for the environment. Taking sustainable transportation instead of driving cuts down on all those harmful chemicals. Fewer cars equals fewer roads. More cars means more roads need to be built, which causes water runoff that contributes to ground and water pollution. Fewer cars and more rail transportation is more sustainable. Noise is also pollution. We rarely think of noise pollution when it comes to cars, unless of course you live by a busy street. Less driving will make our neighborhoods quieter to everyone's benefit. And I just want to conclude by thanking all of you for holding this public meeting, which gives us an opportunity to speak out in favor of this expansion of rail service in our area.
Hi, Liz Raisbeck. I'm the other co-chair of Groton Conservation Advocates in Groton, Connecticut. I want to associate myself with the comments of my co-chair. I really don't have anything important to add. I do have a question, a request for the terms of this study, which is that you pledge not to hold any more public meetings 10 days before Christmas with a survey to receive. And I would also ask that you don't hold public meetings in August, which is the big vacation month around here. It really will depress the amount of public feedback that you get, and it's not courteous to us as citizens. Thank you.
Great. Good afternoon. My name is Alex Berardo. I'm a resident of Westerly and the founder of the very recently set up Friends of the Westerly Railroad Station, Inc. I just want to echo some of the comments that are made by people from Westerly and Westerly adjacent. There's a lot of people in Westerly who are really enthusiastic about the possibility of shoreline service to our town. They have been for many years. Westerly offers a lot operationally as well, such as potential for a layover facility, and it makes sense as a natural meeting point for commuter services westward or southward, Connecticut, New York, and northeast, Rhode Island, Massachusetts. I do have one question about the station siting analysis portion of this study. I don't know if it might be helpful if you can pull up a visual of it, if you can click back through the slides. But if not, that's fine. Yeah, that's good, thank you. So my question is just, there are 3 or 4 alternatives you said that are being studied within each of the station areas A through G. I'm just curious to know whether this is for the purpose of the new stations that are being considered, for example, in Groton and Stonington Borough, or if you're actually looking at alternatives as well for the existing Westerly and Mystic stations. And I'm sorry if that seems like a silly question, but I just know that one thing that's been cited as an obstacle in the past is the fact that Westerly and Mystic are stations that are located on curbs, low-level platforms. So I'm just curious to know if you envision any alternatives like that, or if you're looking to treat them like New London Union Station, which is another legacy station that had a mini high platform as a solution. Thank you.
So I guess I'll be taking this one. Hi everyone, Craig Benoit, part of the study team. I actually contributed to I did, so I'm part of the study team. I did contribute to the station siting review. To answer your question, at this time we're not looking at Westerly, I believe mostly because it's out of jurisdiction. But we do have one alternative for Mystic, kind of citing the curve, the curve issue that you had cited. So we are looking at one alternative in this thing.
Hello, everyone. Andre Bumgardner here, the state representative-elect for Groton and Stonington, specifically the southern half of Groton from the city of Groton to Mystic, and the southwestern corner of Stonington from Mystic to the borough. So the district is very much impacted by HB 5423, which is now law. And so want to especially recognize two driving forces behind the legislation. Representative Chris Conley, who couldn't be here this evening or this afternoon. She serves on the Transportation Committee and worked to obviously corral support amongst the entire state to ensure that southeastern Connecticut is not forgotten as far as improving transit and mobility. And obviously Senator Austin as well, who chairs the Appropriations Committee, and you obviously need to get great ideas funded, so she played a critical role, as did the entire delegation, including Representative Anthony Nolan. But I previously served in the State House from 2015 to 2017, introduced this legislation. It got a public hearing, and sometimes it takes a few years. So I finally got it over the finish line, but now obviously we need to fund these critical projects and proposals. I mentioned in a previous meeting that was held last week in Norwich just about some safety concerns, especially as we, should we extend Shoreline East past New London into Groton and Mystic. There are several at-grade crossings within Stonington, 5 and 1 on the Groton side of Mystic. So just want to make sure, especially as there will be more train traffic, that we ensure that those at-grade crossings have the best technology deployed to ensure that folks are safe should they cross the road with their motor vehicles or just as pedestrians or cyclists. So that's one area. Very much welcome the opportunity for Groton and Stonington to have new train stations, obviously not currently served by Shoreline East. The terminus is in New London, and it'd be so great to connect it to New London, which is really a regional hub, and with the option, to extend rail service up through both Genesee and Wyoming rail lines on both sides of the river, again into Norwich. But also want to recognize a good friend and fighter for this cause, Zell Stever, who chairs the town of Groton's Resiliency and Sustainability Committee. And he went around to really all of our town councils, city councils, went before the city council. Also want to recognize City Mayor Keith Hedrick, and came before the city of New London, really lobbying each and every one of us to get behind this, to really understand the issues in detail. And so we could not have gotten this far without you, and you are a very loud voice for our region on the Commuter Rail Council. So thank you again. This is a marathon, not a sprint. Obviously, we're not going to be able to build train stations overnight, but this will be a huge boon to our region, and we'll do everything in my power to ensure that we get these train stations built. In particular, another thing Zell has worked on in conjunction with our zoning commission, Planning and Zoning Commission, is to work to change the zoning from a mixed-use zone in what we call the downtown Groton to a transit-oriented development zone, which would allow for more grant and funding opportunities. So again, as we're investing in all corners of Groton and Stonington, from the city, into downtown Groton, Mystic, and Stonington Borough, and joining our friends in Westerly, of course, which really is our 170th municipality. But we have to ensure that we don't miss a beat, because it gets busy in Hartford, and so we'll be fighting to ensure that we get these projects funded. One last thing, and I'll yield the floor, but it's so important to, as we're developing our region, to focus on density. and also recognize that sea levels are rising, and our train station or train lines and infrastructure will inevitably be impacted by the projected 20-inch sea level rise by 2050. So resilience obviously will be incorporated in the study, and hope it does remain a key focus as you've outlined, but also the emphasis and importance of pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure, that comes along with it. So, as we're developing train stations, also developing, bike lanes, protected bike lanes, and adequate sidewalks to accommodate large amounts of people, and also incorporate, the ability to have, bring your bike onto a train, which I think, has been done in many other regional rail services. So thank you again for all your support on this. It's great to see many familiar faces, including a few colleagues on the council as well, Bruce Jones. But thank you again for your work on this, and look forward to having your back.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Are we live out there? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. All right, why don't you give yourself a round of applause for coming to this particular public meeting. Thank you. My name is Kerry Redd. I am the Director of Transportation, Parking, and Transit for the City of New London. And on behalf of our Mayor, Mike Passero, taxpayers and residents, we welcome this opportunity to speak in support of this particular feasibility study. It has been a long time coming. Mayor Hendricks and I have talked about this many times over the last few years, and certainly Representative-elect Baumgartner, your comments about Zell's efforts are really modest concern in respects to the Herculean job he has done in championing this particular project. Certainly, connecting out to Westerly would be ideal. I think the first time the mayor and I took a car ride out to Providence, one of the things that we took to catch the airport, to catch a airline down to DC, one of the first things that we talked about is how convenient it would be to be able to take a train. And a simple scenario, when I go to see my parents in Illinois who live just outside Chicago, I get off the airport at O'Hare or Midway. I get on the rail, which I take to downtown Chicago. I then transfer over to the Illinois Central. And when I arrive in Harvey, Illinois, I get on the Pace bus, which drops me out at the mouth of my mom's house for $3.50 round trip. And certainly it's a little bit more expensive today based on the economies of scale, but I've been doing that for the last 40 plus years. It's all about convenience, and your comments are well received, affordability, of course. But I'd like to turn our attention towards the transit-oriented corridors. Currently in the city of New London, we have 1,100 housing units, both affordable and market, under construction. We have 1,500 that are in some form of approval with the Planning and Zoning Committee. I know my brothers and sisters in Groton and town of Groton and Norwich have as robust an economic development thrust. What I'd like to know is, can you give us a little bit more definition as to how the transit-oriented corridors are going to be established and what weight that will play towards ensuring that this feasibility study becomes reality at some point in time in the not-so-distant future. Thank you again for coming out and sharing your thoughts with us, and thank you for an opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much for coming out and speaking as well. So with regard to transit-oriented development, as we talked about today, this was a corridor level scan where we looked at the entirety of the Thames River corridor and along the Northeast corridor. As we refine the number of stations that we're looking at, we'll be conducting a more detailed transit-oriented development scan where we look at parcel level information rather than trying to look at an entire corridor like we have to date. We'll be looking at parcel level information to help us to understand where there's development potential And we'll be reaching out to the communities to talk in more detail about the potential for economic development, transit-oriented development, along those refined number of station locations. Is that?
Sure, I'll just add to that. We're going to, at that level, also be looking at the parcel level of how many planned new units there are for residential units, how much planned commercial space, as well as office space there could be. And then we'll look at, so that's in terms of what is actually planned that we know about right now, but then we'll also be trying to determine what the potential is. So some of that is going to consider whether or not there are vacant parcels or underutilized parcels that could be redeveloped, whether or not there are a lot of surface parking lots, which would count as then underutilized parcels that could be redeveloped, and perhaps then parking could be consolidated in another form, such as a structure. We'll also be looking at the zoning and whether or not and how much additional development the zoning enables, and what kind of density the zoning enables. And so those are sort of some of the factors that we're going to be considering at that level for the more detailed transit-oriented development assessment.
So, just one clarification, so those numbers then will feed into the models for demand?
Correct.
The more development you can find, okay, because I think Westerly certainly has buildable parcels. And having it, but this is, I'm a little nervous about all of this because the naysayers always come out at the last minute. And so we have to, all of us in this room actually have to help to assure that that doesn't happen, that we get people involved early and try to allay their fears about intensifying our development at transportation nodes. So anyway, just saying, anyway, thank you so much for all the work you're doing. We love it.
Getting a little ahead of myself, again, Victor Villagra from Groton. But just sensing the general feedback that you're getting about how excited we are about this project. Can you tell us a little bit about what would be the funding sources that will allow a project like this to come to fruition? In particular, will you require federal funding in addition to state? I appreciate our representatives and legislators' support, verbal support for this at the state level. But as a citizen, I'm perfectly willing to write to our federal representative, to Joe Courtney, and our senators to bring attention to this matter and give them a sense for how strongly we endorse this initiative and how much we would like the funding to be available. So can you give us a high-level orientation as to how a project like this is funded and how we can help you make it a reality?
I'll start, and if anyone wants to add to my response. At this point, we are in the preliminary stage of this study, so we don't even have detailed or even high-level cost estimates at this point. So it's a little bit challenging for us to determine and pinpoint any specific funding sources yet, but we will likely need sources of both capital funding and operational funding for this. And I do think that we have a very supportive federal government at this point in time toward transit investments. So that can potentially be an opportunity. But we would have to get further into the study to understand what types of capital improvements are even being made to know which sources it could be eligible for.
So Connecticut Department of Transportation, one of our goals is to seek out as much discretionary funding as we can. So we would take advantage of any federal funding programs that were coming out that we would have to apply for. We'd have to develop our application based on the merits of the proposal to match it and hopefully win federal money. That's what we've been doing all along. We did that with our CT Fast Track Bus Rapid Transit Way, where we got half of the project cost from a discretionary program fund.
Hi, Angelo Juberez. I'm with the DOT Office of Rail. I also wanted to mention, just to follow up on what Ellen said, especially as we look at the necessary infrastructure upgrades, we will definitely be seeking federal funding and capital and operating funding as well.
Certainly respect that there can't be a commitment at this time regarding funding. Just curious, in light of the federal study that was done a few years ago for upgrades with the Northeast Corridor, and they described, it was a similar process, but obviously larger in scope, they described a future federal allocation of funding. Many of the changes they needed to make included Connecticut. Would there be any synergy in light of this state effort with the federal future allocation?
We still don't know what the order of magnitude is with the cost, so I would say potentially yes. Just a short answer.
I want to be sure I understand regarding the phases of development. The gentleman who spoke to the fact that some of these parts of these projects would be very realizable very soon. And when do you anticipate actually clarifying what parts could be attacked sooner rather than later? Just because I think there's huge eagerness to actually see things realized.
And if anyone wants to add on. We probably won't be able to identify phasing until we have a lot more refinements of the study done. So we would need to have refined specific station locations. We would need to refine the corridor alignments, the operational plan, all of that. And so that's probably not toward closer until the conclusion of the study, which again we anticipate in fall of 2023. At that point, we would have sort of, again, those phased recommendations identified.
Can you all hear me? Yeah. Good. I'm Zell Stever, live in Groton, and I've got a rather extensive statement here, which I am not going to present to you today, because it's a lot of what's already been talked about and is already part of the feasibility study that has been presented to you, or the beginnings of the feasibility study that have already been presented. I'd like to make a couple comments about my understanding of what the funding and why this is all important. The first point is that there could be no federal funding unless you do a feasibility study first. And so that's really what's driving this entire operation, just to be very clear about that. Because as I understand, when Shoreline East was first opened, there was no feasibility study. There was simply an executive directive to the Transportation Department to make it happen, because roads were being shut down lanes were being shut down on I-95. So it is possible to go ahead and do things without having federal money. We've already done that, demonstrated by the fact that we actually have Shoreline East now running pretty effectively. And I should point out that when those roads, the I-95 lanes were basically completed, there was a move by the state to shut down Shoreline East. And folks like you showed up and said, no, we need Shoreline East. And so Shoreline East has continued. While it's true that the COVID and pandemic that we've been through had shut down, or had basically brought to a crawl, trains throughout the state, and in fact throughout the nation, they have now come back, but in different sorts of ways. Now the details of that are still trying to be understood by the rail people, but let me suggest there's some interesting changes that have taken place. Very recently, I had the opportunity to take Shoreline East from New London all the way to New York City on a Saturday morning. And by the time I changed trains in New Haven and got down to Bridgeport, there was standing room only. that tells me there's a demand for these kinds of services. And I would sure love to be able to hop on the train in Mystic and go to Providence Green or go to Boston to take my train or take my plane across the country to see my grandkids. So I think there is a huge opportunity here, but let's be clear, the feasibility study is basically being done to demonstrate that we have a real opportunity here and that it's cost effective. And let me also say that if you think of this as being two parts, that is, there is the part that goes from expanding the current shoreline east from New London to Westerly with very little effort. That could be done immediately. It could be done immediately. The trains stop in New London and they go all what's, I believe you guys call turn and burn. And so they wait in New London until it's time to head back to New Haven. That time could be spent by going and stopping at an existing station, that is Mystic, albeit on a curve and albeit not high platform. Amtrak finds it perfectly acceptable a couple times a day, and it could go all the way up to that really lovely station up in Westerly. So you have an opportunity to phase in potentially this whole operation, I think, in a very interesting and very thoughtful sort of way. And so my hope is that as we go through this study, and these folks up front know, they've heard from me before, this is something that I think can be done and should be done. It is, I think, one of the economic drivers for our region. We've got to think of southeastern Connecticut, that is the New London, Groton area, and that includes Norwich, really is the economic center of eastern Connecticut. And there's no reason why we can't develop that with good rail. After all, the western part of the state is using rail to get folks to New York City. We have a need to have intra-state travel here in our region, connecting up New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island.
Ladies and gentlemen, there's a submarine returning from sea. She can be viewed from the ship, the pier, or the knowledge room.
No one is allowed to go aboard the ship. And the point is, I think we have an opportunity to connect up the southern states in the southern New England together, because the two lines that go up, and while it may look confusing on that map to get to Norwich, both those lines go all the way up to Massachusetts. The one on the east side goes up to none other than Worcester, and the other one goes up to, did I pronounce that right? I think I did. The other one goes up to Springfield. And so there are opportunities, and I'd like to finally point out that these are tracks that are in the ground. While they have not been necessarily always upgraded, they are there. They have been serving the community for well over 100 years, and they've been very effective in doing that as time has gone on. And I should also point out that money has been available to upgrade the western side of the track going up to Norwich. There was a big study, big funding, $10 million funding effort. Can't remember the name of it, but it was done a few years ago where they actually spent $10 million on the rail bed there to upgrade that. So there is these possibilities that we have out there to make this all happen. And so I thank you all for coming.
You brought up something. Can they go ahead with the train to Westerly? I mean, what? That's the question.
Well, I will not answer that question. That's not my ability. But I would say that I think there's an opportunity to do that sooner than later, as we go forward here. Thank you very much, and I will provide you a copy of this offline.
Thank you, Mr. Stever. As others have mentioned, he is a project champion and he's also a member of our study steering committee. Are there any final questions, comments? Acting Representative Newland.
I know everybody wants to leave, but I just want to say we have to keep making noise. We can't let this go silent, because when we let it go silent, the other part of Connecticut gets what they want.
Yep, yep.
So if we don't continue to put this on social network, if we don't continue to send the letters that are needed, then we're hurting ourselves. So with as many people that showed up today, I'm going to ask you again, please put this out there on social network. Write letters to the editor, write letters to your legislators, and legislators that are on the other side of the state, saying how important this is to you. Because we really need this in southeastern Connecticut, and we can only do it without you. We can't do it alone. Thank you very much.
Just to follow up with what Zell had to say, is there any possibility of fast-tracking the line that already exists, the stations that are already there, and getting the train to Mystic and Westerly?
At the moment, no, unfortunately. There are some contractual limitations, and there are some station upgrades that are still required.
Right, I believe that concludes our question and answer session. Thank you again, everyone, for your enthusiasm and for sharing your questions and your thoughts. We will be sticking around if anyone wants to continue perusing the informational poster boards, or if anyone has any follow-up questions or discussion items they would like to ask us.